My wife cheated on me with her boss, and I just found out he's secretly trying to steal our $350, $0 inheritance while planning to take custody of our two kids. How do I fight back? Hello, everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd be the guy writing something like this, but here I am. My wife Emily and I had been together for about 8 years. We had a pretty good life, decent jobs, 2 kids, a nice house, and enough money to get by comfortably. But lately something felt off. She started acting weird, distant even. At first I thought it was just stress from work or the kids. She's always bitchy when she's stressed, snapping at everyone including me. But then I noticed little things. Her phone always on silent, hiding her screen when I walked into the room, and her canceling plans last minute with some excuse about work being crazy. One day, I came home early from work because I wasn't feeling well. I usually work late, but that day I decided to surprise her. I figured we could have dinner together, maybe talk about the kids' upcoming school events. I walk into the house and hear muffled voices coming from the bedroom. My heart skips a beat. I freeze for a second, listening. The voices are low, but I catch enough to realize she's talking to someone. Then I hear her say, "You know I can't keep hiding this. I want us to be a family, but I need more than just your money and this fake marriage." That's when I saw it. Her phone lying on the bed, open to a text chain with someone named Boss. The messages weren't just friendly. They were flirty, suggestive. She was talking about meeting up, about how she loved the way he made her feel. My stomach dropped. I looked at the screen and my blood ran cold. There were pictures, screenshots of their conversations, some of her in lingerie, some of her topless, saying she wanted to see him again, that she missed his touch. My wife, my partner for over 8 years, was cheating on me with her boss, and the worst part, I could tell from the tone of those messages that this wasn't some one-night stand. They'd been doing this for months, maybe longer. I didn't want to believe it at first. I was in shock. I wanted to scream, to yell, to punch something. But I just stood there frozen. I felt betrayed, humiliated. How could she do this? How could she lie to me, pretend everything was fine while she was sneaking around behind my back? I knew I had to confront her, but I didn't want to do it there and then. I needed to cool down, to think. So I quietly backed out of the room, grabbed my phone, and left the house without saying a word. I needed to process what I'd just seen. Later that night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the messages on my phone. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. I kept asking myself how I missed all the signs. The late nights, the little lies, her mood swings. She'd been so bitchy and defensive lately, I just thought she was stressed. I never imagined she'd cheat on me, let alone with her own boss, someone she used to brag about working for. I felt sick. Angry, betrayed, humiliated all at once. How could she do this to me, to our family, and what about the money? I knew she was always talking about how she wanted to get a bigger house, how she hated feeling stuck in this small town. Now I realized she was planning more than just a new house. She was planning her escape with her boss's help, and probably trying to take our inheritance along with her. I started digging deeper. I hired a private investigator just to confirm what I already suspected. She'd been sneaking around, meeting him outside of work, and I found out she'd even been talking about how she could manipulate her way into getting full custody of the kids, especially if I wasn't careful. They'd spun this story about how I was a bad father, a jealous husband, and that she was just trying to find herself. Yeah, right. All I saw was a woman who was more interested in money, power, and a new life with her lover than she was in her family. The betrayal cut deep, but what made it worse was knowing she was planning to steal our $350, $0 inheritance and leave me with nothing. No house, no stability, no future. That's when I realized I had to do something. I couldn't let her get away with this. I had to fight for my family, for my kids, for what was right. I started making plans, gathering evidence, and figuring out how to confront her without losing everything. I knew I couldn't just blow up and go crazy, but I also knew I couldn't let her walk all over me. This was going to be a war, and I was ready to fight dirty if I had to. I just didn't know yet how far she was willing to go or how much she'd already planned to take from us. But one thing was clear. Emily was no longer the woman I thought I knew. The next few days were a blur of planning and trying to keep my emotions in check. I couldn't let her see how much she'd hurt me, not yet. I had to gather more evidence, find out exactly what her plans were, and prepare myself for the confrontation that was inevitable. I hired a private investigator, like I said, and he confirmed what I already suspected. Emily had been sneaking around with her boss, a guy named Ryan. They'd been meeting outside of work, going to hotels, and even taking trips together. The investigator caught photos of her leaving a hotel downtown, looking flushed and happy, like she was finally getting what she wanted. I also started digging into her finances. Turns out, she'd been secretly funneling money into an account she opened under her maiden name. When I confronted her about it, she spun some bullshit about how she was just saving for a rainy day, how she deserved a little fun after all those years of being a good wife. She lied so easily, with a bitchy smirk on her face, acting like I was the one overreacting. But I knew better. I knew she was planning something big, probably trying to get her hands on that inheritance, and maybe even trying to push me out of the picture entirely so she could run off with Ryan and the cash. One night I decided I'd had enough. I sat her down after the kids went to bed. I told her I knew everything about her affair, her plans, her lies, her reaction. She shrugged, looked at me with that smirk and said, "Oh, come on, Jack, you're overreacting. It's just sex. It doesn't mean anything. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I couldn't believe how cold and dismissive she was. For a woman who pretended to be so caring, so family-oriented, she was a damn actress. She kept lying, saying she loved me, that it was just a mistake, that she was confused, and that Ryan was just a fling. But I wasn't buying it anymore. The most infuriating part was her attitude about the money. She kept saying, "You're so paranoid, Jack. You think I'm trying to take everything. I just want to be happy. Maybe I deserve to be happy after all these years of your control." Control? That's what she called it. She'd been manipulating me from the start. I was furious. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I also knew I had to stay calm. I told her I had proof, that I was going to do whatever it took to protect my family and our inheritance. She just rolled her eyes, acting like I was the crazy one. I started thinking about the next steps. I needed to get legal advice, figure out how to prevent her from taking the money, and most importantly, how to keep my kids safe. Because I knew she was trying to spin this so that she looked like the victim, like I was the bad guy. That's her style: lie, manipulate, and then blame everyone else for her problems. But I'd seen enough. I knew she was planning to leave, maybe even file for custody, claiming I was an unfit father. She'd been trying to turn the kids against me, telling them I didn't care about them, that I was just a control freak. I also learned that Ryan was planning to buy a house nearby, probably to make it easier for her to run off with the kids and start fresh. The more I found out, the clearer it became. She was in this for the money, the power, and the thrill of a new life. And she was willing to destroy everything we had, our marriage, our family, our future, just to get it. I couldn't let that happen, so I made a decision. I was going to let her get away with this. I started drafting a plan to confront her again, but this time with evidence in hand and a clear head. I also contacted a lawyer, someone who specialized in family law and financial disputes. I wanted to be prepared for whatever she threw at me. I had no intention of losing the inheritance, and I sure as hell wasn't going to give her custody of my kids without a fight. I knew she'd try to manipulate the situation, but I had enough proof to show she was the one in the wrong. The biggest shock came when I found out that she'd been talking to Ryan about how she could manipulate the lawyers, how she could spin the story in her favor, and how she'd make me look like the bad guy. That's when I realized she'd been planning her escape for months. She'd been lying to everyone, her friends, her family, even the kids, just to get what she wanted. That's when I got really angry. Not just sad or betrayed, but furious. I was ready to fight for my family, for what was ours, and for the future I thought we had. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I also knew I couldn't let her win. After I gathered all the evidence and talked to a lawyer, I didn't waste any time. I knew Emily was planning her next move, probably trying to spin the story in her favor before I could act. She was already acting more bitchy and dismissive, like she thought she could just brush everything off and keep doing what she was doing. But I wasn't going to let her. I had enough proof now to back up everything I'd said, and I was ready to confront her again, this time with a plan to stop her from stealing the inheritance and taking the kids away. One evening, I sat her down again. I told her I knew the truth, that I had proof of her affair and her plans to manipulate the situation. Her reaction was classic Emily. She looked annoyed, rolled her eyes, and tried to brush me off. She said, "Jack, you're overreacting. This is all just your paranoia. I love you, I love our kids. Ryan is just a boss I used to vent to. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I stared at her, trying not to lose my temper. I had all the receipts, all the texts, the photos from the pie. I laid everything out on the table, and her face faltered for a second. That's when I decided I'd had enough of her lies. I told her I was filing for a legal restraining order, that I was going to stop her from taking the money or the kids without my consent. Her face turned red with anger and she spat back. "You're just trying to control me. You're insecure. You're jealous because I found someone who actually makes me feel alive." She was trying to twist everything around, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I knew her game. I knew she'd been lying and scheming behind my back for months. The next step was to contact the lawyer and start the legal process. I wanted to secure the inheritance, make sure she couldn't drain our bank accounts or transfer assets without my approval. I also hired a private investigator to keep tabs on her movements. I needed to know if she was meeting Ryan again, or if she was trying to make arrangements to leave town with the kids. Every day I felt a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I loved my wife, but I couldn't ignore what she'd done. She'd betrayed everything we built, and now she was trying to manipulate her way out of it. Meanwhile, she kept insisting she was innocent, that I was just jealous and paranoid. She threw tantrums, called me controlling, said I was ruining her life. But I kept my cool. I knew her tricks. I knew she was trying to wear me down, make me doubt myself, make me believe I was overreacting. But I also knew I had the evidence, and I wasn't going to let her spin her web of lies any longer. I told her that if she didn't stop her manipulations, I would take her to court, and I'd do everything in my power to protect our kids and our money. She responded by trying to guilt-trip me, crying about how she was trapped, how she deserved happiness, and how I was just a jealous control freak. That's her favorite line, playing the victim while she's the one cheating, lying, and scheming. I didn't fall for it. I knew. She was trying to push me into a corner, but I stayed firm. I told her I'd give her a chance to be honest, but if she didn't come clean, I'd go full legal and financial war. I was done playing nice. What really pushed me over the edge was when I found out she'd been talking about how she could manipulate the kids into turning against me. She'd been telling them I was mean, that I didn't care about them, that I was just a control freak. I couldn't believe she'd stoop so low. My kids are everything to me. I had to protect them from her lies. I started talking to a child psychologist just to be prepared for what was coming, and I made sure I documented everything. At this point, I knew Emily wasn't just after the money or the affair. She was trying to set herself up to leave with the inheritance and full custody while painting me as the villain. I wasn't going to let her. I was starting to realize her bitchy, manipulative side was much darker than I thought. She was dangerous, and I had to be smarter. I kept my guard up, ready for whatever she threw at me. In the meantime, I also started quietly building a support network, talking to friends, family, anyone who could help if this all blew up. I was preparing for the worst, knowing that Emily's next move might be to file for divorce and custody, claiming I was unfit. But I had the proof she was cheating, scheming, and trying to steal from us. I knew I had the upper hand, but I also knew this wasn't over yet. Emily was relentless, and I had to stay one step ahead if I wanted to save what was left of my family and my future. The days that followed felt like walking on a razor's edge. I kept my head down, but I was constantly watching her every move. I knew Emily was getting desperate. She started acting even more bitchy, snapping at the kids, throwing fits over the smallest things, and pretending everything was fine when she was clearly planning her next move. I could see the cracks in her facade. She was trying to act innocent, but I knew her too well now. She was cornered, and her manipulations were only going to get worse. One thing I did was install a few discreet cameras around the house. Nothing obvious, just enough to catch her talking to Ryan or making plans. I wanted to know exactly how far she was willing to go. That's when I caught her on camera, whispering on the phone late at night, talking about how she'd get rid of me once she had the kids and the money. She was plotting to make it look like I was the bad guy, maybe even accuse me of abuse or neglect, just to get custody. The thought made my stomach turn. She was so bitchy, so calculating, I couldn't believe I'd married her. Meanwhile, I kept pushing ahead with the legal steps. I filed for an emergency hearing to get a temporary restraining order. I wanted to stop her from withdrawing money or leaving town with the kids. I also made sure to document every lie she told, every manipulative tactic she used. I knew she was going to try to spin the story in court, so I had to be prepared. I also reached out to a financial advisor to see how much of the inheritance was protected and what legal options. I had to ensure she couldn't drain our accounts. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. She went into full-blown bitch mode. She yelled at me, accused me of trying to control her, and said I was just jealous of her success. She called me paranoid, insecure, and told me I was ruining her life. But I wasn't buying her bullshit anymore. I had the evidence, and I knew she was lying. I confronted her again, telling her I'd be watching every move she made from now on. Her face twisted with rage, but she didn't deny the affair anymore. She just kept trying to guilt me, saying I was breaking up the family and that I was jealous of her happiness. That night, I sat her down and told her I was done playing her game. I told her I was going to fight her every step of the way, legally, financially, and emotionally. I warned her that if she tried to take the kids or the money, I'd fight her in court, and I'd do everything possible to keep what's ours. I also told her that I'd be exposing everything: her affair, her scheming, her plans to manipulate the system. I knew her, and I knew she was reckless. She'd underestimated me, but I was ready for the battle. At that point, I started reaching out to some of her friends, people she'd confided in, just to get a sense of what she was telling them. I wanted to make sure I had allies on my side, or at least people who could see through her lies. I also started preparing my kids for what was coming. I knew she was trying to turn them against me, but I wanted them to know the truth, how much I loved them, and how I was doing everything I could to protect them from her manipulations. One of the most shocking revelations came when I found out she'd been talking about how she'd get rid of me once she had full custody. She'd even told Ryan she was planning to make it look like an accident or some sort of health issue so she could get full custody without me fighting her. That's when I realized how dangerous she'd become. She wasn't just a cheating wife anymore. She was actively scheming to destroy our family, to take everything I had worked for, and to run off with her lover and the money. I started planning my next move carefully. I knew I had to stay calm, keep my evidence ready, and make sure I was legally protected. I also decided I'd confront her one last time, this time in front of the lawyer, the pie, and possibly the court. I wanted her to see I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this, especially not with our kids' futures on the line. I felt a mixture of anger, frustration, and a deep sense of betrayal. She'd lied, cheated, and schemed her way into what she thought was a win, but I was determined to stop her. I also started working on a plan to get full custody of the kids. I knew she'd try to make me look like the villain, but I had enough evidence to prove I was a good father, that I cared deeply about the kids' well-being. I also knew I had to be prepared for her to try to turn them against me, so I was talking to a child psychologist to get advice on how to handle the situation. I wanted to make sure that no matter what she said or did, I'd be able to protect my children from her bitchy manipulations. This whole ordeal was draining, but I refused to give up. I loved my family, and I knew I had to fight for us, no matter how dirty she played. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that Emily's greed, her scheming, and her bitchy attitude wouldn't win, not if I could help it. The courtroom preparations took up most of my waking hours. I knew Emily would do everything she could to turn the judge against me. She always played the victim, crying about how I was controlling and unloving. But I had the evidence, and I had the truth. I worked tirelessly with my lawyer, making sure every document, every text, every photo was organized and ready to be presented. I also kept a detailed journal of her behavior, her lies, her manipulations, her conversations with Ryan, and her attempts to turn the kids against me. One of the most infuriating things was how she tried to spin her affair as nothing more than a mistake, then blamed me for not being attentive enough, claiming I was distant and controlling. She'd call me paranoid and insecure, but I knew her game. I knew she was trying to use her tears and her bitchy attitude to sway the court, to make me look like the bad guy so she could walk away with the inheritance and custody. But I wasn't going to let her. I had everything documented. I even hired an expert to analyze her phone and social media activity, confirming she'd been planning this for months. Meanwhile, Emily's attitude grew even more bitchy and manipulative. She started making scenes, yelling at me in front of the kids, trying to humiliate me. She accused me of being a terrible father, of controlling her, of trying to ruin her life. But I stayed calm because I knew her tactics. I knew she was trying to provoke me into losing my temper so she could play the victim even more convincingly. I kept my composure, knowing that the evidence I had was going to speak for itself. The day of the hearing finally arrived. I was nervous but also determined. I knew I had the truth on my side. As I sat in the courtroom, I saw her sitting there, looking bitchy and defiant, trying to hold her composure. The judge asked questions, and I presented every piece of evidence: texts, photos, bank statements, witness statements from friends who confirmed her scheming. I explained how she'd been planning to leave with the inheritance, how she'd been manipulating the kids, and how she'd been unfaithful for months. Her lawyer tried to spin her story, claiming she was the victim, that I was abusive and controlling. But I had witnesses and I had proof. I told the court about her affair, her scheming to take our money, and her attempts to turn the kids against me. I explained how she'd been talking about Ryan as her future, how she'd been planning to get rid of me once she had the custody. I could see her biting her lip, trying to hide her bitchy smirk, but she knew she was losing. The judge listened carefully, and after a tense hour, she made her ruling. She granted me temporary custody of the kids and issued a restraining order against Emily. She also ordered a full financial audit of our accounts to prevent her from draining the inheritance. The judge warned Emily that any further manipulations or attempts to harm me or the kids would result in serious legal consequences. I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. It was finally happening. I was taking back control. But Emily wasn't done. As I left the courtroom, she stormed out, yelling at me, calling me a controlling bastard, accusing me of ruining her life. She was crying, bitching, throwing her tantrum like the spoiled brat she'd become. I just kept walking, knowing I'd done everything I could to protect my family. I knew she'd try to fight back, maybe try to manipulate the kids more, or even try to get full custody herself. But I had the court's backing now, and I was going to do everything possible to keep my family safe. That night, I sat alone in my house, feeling drained but victorious. I had fought off her schemes, protected the inheritance, and secured a better future for my kids. I couldn't help but think about how much she'd lied and schemed just to get what she wanted. She'd been so bitchy and manipulative, playing innocent when she was really the one behind all of it. But I also realized I'd grown stronger through all this, more cautious, more determined. I knew the battle wasn't over, but I had the upper hand now, and I was ready for whatever she threw at me next. I just hoped she'd finally realize she'd lost, and maybe, just maybe, she'd start thinking about what really mattered: her family. The days after the court ruling were a whirlwind. Emily tried to make a scene at the house, screaming and crying about how unfair everything was, how I was ruining her life. She called friends and family, spreading her lies about how I was abusive and controlling, trying to turn everyone against me. But I had already prepared myself for this. I kept all the evidence close, documented her every move, and stayed calm. I knew her bitchy attitude was just a desperate attempt to regain control, but I wasn't giving her that satisfaction anymore. I focused on rebuilding my life and making sure the kids felt safe and loved. I hired a family therapist to help them process everything, especially with Emily's manipulative tactics. She'd been telling them I was the bad guy, trying to convince them I didn't care about their feelings. But I made sure they knew the truth, that I loved them more than anything, and I was doing everything I could to protect them from her lies. I kept my communication open, honest, and consistent, and slowly I saw them start to trust me again. Meanwhile, Emily's attempts to manipulate the situation kept escalating. She filed for full custody, claiming I was unfit and that I was trying to control her. But I had the court's recent ruling, my evidence, and expert witnesses supporting my case. It was clear she was desperate, trying to cling to her new life with Ryan and the inheritance. I knew she'd never let go easily, but I also knew I had the legal upper hand now. Looking back, I realize I learned a lot through all this chaos. I learned that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the people you trust most can turn out to be the biggest schemers. I learned that being calm and prepared is the best way to handle manipulative and bitchy people. And I learned that no matter how much someone lies, truth and evidence can ultimately prevail. I also learned that protecting your family isn't just about legal battles or evidence. It's about staying emotionally grounded, being there for your kids, and holding onto your integrity. I managed to rebuild my life, and I know I'll come out stronger, more cautious, but also more aware of what real loyalty and love mean. Emily's scheming and bitchy attitude didn't break me. Instead, they made me realize what I really value: family, honesty, and standing up for what's right. As I write this, I want anyone going through something similar to know that you're not alone. Trust your instincts, document everything, and don't be afraid to fight for what's yours, whether it's your money, your kids, or your dignity. The road ahead might be tough, but justice and clarity can come if you stay true to yourself and don't let manipulative people like Emily win. I finally feel like I can breathe again, and I hope anyone reading this finds peace and strength in their own battles.